Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our next installment in our Career Booster webinar series, where today we're going to be talking about employee relations and the anatomy of an investigation. My name is Jeremy Bell, Career Services Manager here at Grantham University, and joining me are our moderators today, Raylene Jones, Career Services Coordinator for Grantham University. Raylene works with our students within the Mark Skousen School of Business, as well as the College of Arts and Sciences. Also joining us is Doug Dimler, also in our Career Services team, who works with our students in College of Engineering and Computer Science, as well as the College of Nursing and Allied Health. And joining us today as our presenter and employee relations expert is Brandon McCauley, who is Human Resources Manager for Grantham University. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. So to get us started, Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into HR.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My path to HR is probably a little different than some others that you would hear. I've been with Grantham University for about 7 years, and I've been in HR for about 5 of those years. And you know, I didn't go to college to seek out an HR degree or really a career. It wasn't until I became a manager after going through the admissions kind of career for about 10 years. And when I was a manager, that's when I really became interested in the human element of the workplace and ensuring that things are fair and just and you know, people are set up for success. And so that's really when I became interested and kind of put my foot in the door and got some opportunities to apply for HR, and I obviously got the position and have really, it was right away, I knew that's what I wanted my career to be once I got into the HR field.
Awesome. Awesome, thank you. So for those of us who are listening today, we would encourage you to ask any questions that you have with regard to human resources, employee investigations, which we'll be discussing today, or workplace investigations. So for those of you who are listening online, there are 2 ways that you can ask questions. You can ask them via the questions feature, or you can also ask them via chat. And just to kind of get things started, I just want to ask you, so when it comes to workplace investigations as it regards to HR, what do you think is the most important thing that our listeners should know when it comes to conducting an investigation when they come up?
Yeah, you know, it's important to know that there are all types of investigations in HR or the workplace, really. There could be anything from an audit of Fair Labor Standards Act when you're trying to figure out if a job is hourly or salary or non-exempt or exempt. There could be, you know, a performance review investigation where you're trying to find out the correlation between performance reviews and the success of a certain area in the company. I think today we're talking more about the employee relations investigation. So I think one of the most important things to remember is that it's an objective you know, process, and that means that you want to try to keep your emotions, your personal feelings, those things kind of out of the investigation and more focus on the facts that you're seeking to understand the facts. And you know, every investigation is different, but the process kind of remains the same. So,
Raylene?
Yeah, so how would somebody initiate the HR investigation?
Someone would initiate by taking their claim or accusation, if you will, to their manager. That's one way they can initiate it, and their manager kind of brings it to HR. You know, they can also talk to their department head, and sometimes they can come directly to HR itself, and that's oftentimes what an employee will do. It's very important in HR to make sure that you create an environment for your employees, that you have an open door and that they feel comfortable, and that, you know, there's a level of confidentiality coming to HR, because if you create that environment, you know, people aren't going to sweep things under the rug, and we're able to address them, you know, if need be.
Thank you.
Question I had is, what is the first step HR takes when starting an investigation?
The first step. So a lot of times, people will think, hey, let's go ahead and speak to the individual, and really kind of have an interview, and that's one of the first steps. But even before that, you kind of want to step back as an HR professional and have a plan, have a strategy. You want to make sure you know who is going to do the investigations or the interviews, what will be investigated, what documentation needs to be collected even before the interviews or during it, and then also who's going to be interviewed, what information are you going to try to seek and from who. And so I think a strategy or a plan is one of the main things before you even start those interviews.
I do have a follow-up question. Is there a set plan to certain situations, or is every strategy different?
It's situational. I think that's a really good question. You learn from context in HR, and what I mean by that is you learn from your past. We look at this and say, hey, we've dealt with this situation or something very similar. What did we do at that point? Did it work? What things are we going to take moving forward and do the same thing? But every situation is really different, and that's what makes HR so interesting. So great at times.
Thank you. Thank you.
So how do you document the investigation? It seems like depending on the situation, you're collecting different types of materials. So is there a specific software that you use, or who do you have to report that information to?
Well, documenting is crucial. I mean, that's if you're going to be in HR, one of the most important things that you have to understand is everything needs to be documented and documented correctly. So there's different ways to do that. I like to write in a notebook and take notes. When I'm interviewing someone, it's other people like to type on their computer, maybe an electronic note or a file, and that's certainly fine. A lot of people house their documentation electronically, which makes total sense in 2017. But I still like the old paper and pen because I just feel like it's less distracting to people. And I even tell them, hey, I'm going to be taking some notes here. And so they're prepared for that. But when you have someone typing, the sound, it's hard sometimes for someone to focus on what they're saying. So, to answer your question, I do a notebook. I then go and I, scan things into the computer. I do keep electronic files. I keep personnel paper files. There's department files. There's personnel files. And so there's a lot of different ways you can document information.
I have a question from one of our listeners here. So Liza asks, once a complaint or issue has been filed with HR, what legal obligation does the HR professional have to keep confidentiality to make sure the employee does not get retaliated against? Good question.
Yeah, really good question. Confidentiality is a really interesting thing in HR. A lot of people don't know this, but it's as an HR professional, when interviewing someone, you can't say to them, hey, you need to keep this confidential. You can't tell anyone else, otherwise there will be implications. We try to do that as much as possible, keep things confidential, but there's something called concerted or protected activity out there where it's basically as a right as an employee to go and tell whoever they want, whatever they want. And that's actually in Section 7 in the National Relations Labor Act. And so an employer can get in a lot of trouble if they tell an employee or try to retaliate against an employee for telling somebody else something about the investigation. But you can always direct them, right? You can always say, hey, because we want this to be an investigation that is not compromised, because we don't want to put something in another person's mind, we ask that you keep this confidential. So, throughout the investigation. But it's a sticky subject, when it comes to confidentiality.
Can you describe what discoverable means?
Yes, that is really to do with documentation in an HR investigation. Anything that is documented can basically be discovered, and that's through an agency or, say, the court. If this goes that far, if it goes to litigation or the stages of litigation, they may request all of your documentation. And so that's why it's important, to be objective in your notes and make sure you collect the right information as via email. I mean, they'll ask to look at emails, chats, texts, notes, personnel files, performance reviews, basically anything. And a lot of times it's used as the employee's defense, and so you've got to be really careful what you're writing in those notes. That's kind of what discoverable means.
What does follow-up look like with an investigation?
I think this is probably, in my opinion, where a lot of employers miss the boat when it comes to investigations. Follow-up, and that's something I had to learn as well. You get so immersed in this investigation and then your findings, and you come to a conclusion, and then you forget to tell everyone else really that's pertinent to the whole investigation. And I'm not saying you have to necessarily tell them what you found, because sometimes you can't, because of other individuals involved. But you do want to follow up with the necessary parties, and sometimes it even kind of looks like, hey, we just want you to know that action was or was not taken, and that we've concluded the investigation. And just a simple statement like that is a follow-up. Or if there's direction in the follow-up, if you're saying to a certain individual, hey, moving forward, we want you to make sure you do not exhibit this behavior, or you stop doing this or that. But it's important that there's a conclusion through the whole thing, or at the end of the investigation.
We have another question from one of our listeners, from Adam, who asks, what are your options if an investigation has been completed but no evidence was found other than what the employee claimed of another employee?
Those are probably the hardest investigations, Adam. It's kind of, that he said, she said, without the evidence. And so, you want to make sure that you're objective in that, not subjective, because just because you feel that maybe she's lying, and maybe he isn't, if you don't have the evidence for that, then, guilty, or you're not guilty until proven guilty, right? So you've got to keep things objective. So really what your options are is to conclude that exactly what you said. Hey, there was no evidence, clear-cut evidence that was exhibited that we found in our conclusions, and therefore no action is taken. And you have to make sure that they know that there's not going to be any retaliation against the claim. You have to make sure they know that there's always an option to kind of appeal, if you would, to maybe even a different department. Sometimes we use compliance here to kind of look at an investigation. Maybe if we can't come to a conclusion or we don't see anything, maybe the compliance department can. So,
in that type of situation, is the person that does not have evidence counseled in a way to collect the right evidence of proof for whatever event is happening against them?
Can you repeat that question?
So say you have this situation where there's somebody who has said this person is bullying me, or this person is treating me poorly. They don't have evidence, so there was no conclusion to the case. Are they counseled to collect evidence, or what type of evidence should they be collecting to support their claims?
Well, I don't know necessarily if they're counseled to collect evidence, but we do make it clear that this, and you don't want to call people liars, because it very well could have happened, and that's what you kind of tell them, is you say, hey, we take this very serious. We obviously have policies in place. We didn't find clear, objective evidence that this was going on. Now, anything in the future, you want to make sure that you let us know immediately, and then with the accused party, you definitely don't want to treat them as if they're guilty, but you do give them disclaimers and say the same thing. Hey, we've got policies, and we haven't found that you have done anything against policy. However, we want you to take this very serious, and it is important. So, but yeah, you don't necessarily counsel them to seek out documentation. We just say, hey, if you have documentation, if you have any witnesses, if you have anything else, then definitely bring it to us. So.
Awesome, thank you.
This might be a large question, but what's the process from start to finish with an investigation? I don't know if you can kind of summarize that for us or not.
Okay. Well, we talked about it earlier. I think the first thing, once someone brings something to us, whatever way that may be, is to come up with a strategy or plan. And some employers will investigate virtually any accusation or any complaint that they get, and I think our company is like that. Some companies will just investigate the things that are against policy, harassment, retaliation, bullying, sexual harassment, and so it's up to your company how you do that. We investigate any claim, anything that makes an employee feel uncomfortable. Well, I shouldn't say anything. If you're uncomfortable because the air conditioning's too cold, we'll probably send that somewhere else. But anything that we feel people may not be treated fairly, we'll go ahead and we'll get together and we'll come up with a kind of strategy and plan. Who will investigate? Who will be investigated? What evidence needs to be collected? Who will be interviewed? And then we start the investigation. And it's really a seek to understand, a seek to find out the information process at that point. We talk to all the individuals we can. And the interesting thing is when you're doing these investigations, you may hear a name when you're speaking to someone about the situation that you didn't even think about or didn't know about, initially. So all of a sudden, boom, you add them to the list. And you add, and sometimes it keeps going that way. But after the kind of investigations have taken place, you may need to follow up with information. Maybe some information wasn't clear. Maybe you need more information from those individuals, so you'll go that route. So then follow-up is important. And then you collect and organize your findings. You sit down and you say, hey, if there's different individuals involved with the investigation, you collaborate and say, is this what you heard? Is this, what information did you have versus what I have? And then you conclude, you conclude your findings. You report and document those findings, and then you take any necessary action that needs to be completed. And then, of course, the last thing is follow-up. Follow up with all parties and let them know at least, an action was taken or it was not taken.
So it sounds like that's a really big process. Who are the normal people that are involved in the investigation?
It's generally there's HR managers or employee relations, managers or individuals. So it's really your HR department, the people that are in those specific positions. Supervisors are always involved. Department heads could be involved. I know different employers do it differently. I mean, we involve our VP of HR in every single investigation, and he'll kind of direct us if he wants to be involved in the interviews, which oftentimes he is, or if he just wants us to kind of take it and run with it. But then also there could be business leaders like SALT, we call them SALT, their senior leadership team, right?
I think it's now our executive
leadership. I'm sorry, that's just changed. So executive leadership team, and even sometimes local authorities will get involved. So
that's very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Another question from our listeners. Veronica asks, how do you feel about recording conversations with difficult employees? My situation is whenever our HR director is out, this difficult employee has a tendency to corner me and come into my office to complain. I just want to know how to protect myself.
Well, different states have different regulations on recording individuals. Trust me, I mean, if I could, I'd just have the record button all the time in my office.
Can you stop while I press this button?
Well, who's to say, they're not recording a conversation with their phone? I mean, technology these days is crazy.
It's everywhere.
But Veronica, I think it's a good question. I think what probably is better, I mean, it's, obviously look at the local, and state mandates for recording conversations. But I think, even better than that, you may, with this specific individual, want another person involved in any communication that you have with that person. Maybe bring in another individual in HR, maybe bring in the supervisor, maybe, someone from the leadership team. Just have someone there, and you can tell that individual, hey, moving forward, I would feel more comfortable if we had another individual in here when we spoke. And so now you have two individuals in there, and they cannot do the he said she said process with you because someone else is there to claim. So.
Cool. One more question we have from our listeners. Marcus asks, at what point do you bring in an outside investigator?
That's a good question. I think it's more of you would bring in an attorney, or legal counsel, seek legal counsel or advice before you really brought in anyone to investigate. That's kind of our job in HR. We are the investigators. If local authorities need to be involved, that really has to do with the safety. Anything that is a crime or safety issue, I think it's definitely, crucial to get the authorities involved. Just like we expect our employees to bring us any issues or concerns within the workplace, the local authorities would do the same if there's this criminal activity. We've got a definite obligation to get them involved. But as far as in the investigation in general for an employee relations issue, it's really done internal, and that's what our job is, and that's why we've got to take it very seriously.
What type of questions are generally asked in an investigation?
Questions, it could vary, but really if you want a general, broad sense of the questions, it's really the old who, what, when, where, how, right? It's
pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. But you're seeking to find, the information, and you're doing it. So, for example, where and when did the action take place? Is it ongoing or has it stopped? Who committed the behavior? What exactly happened? Who else was present, if anyone? How did it make you feel? You want to take those things into account. Did you ever communicate that it, offended that individual? Who else may have seen or heard? So things like that. The who, what, when, where, how. But you peel back that onion, we kind of call it. You start with those, high-level questions, and then you drill down and really find the details from there. And it could go a lot of different ways based on what they said.
We sort of already covered this one with a student question, but I'll go ahead and ask again. How confidential should the investigation be? Does that mean that as an HR manager you can discuss or not discuss with other HR managers, and of course the people that you are questioning? You said earlier that you ask them not to share, but technically they can. Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can. It's really just those who are involved. It depends on the company and how collaborative you are with your HR department. We have 2 HR managers, and so we keep each other in the loop, whether they're not involved in a specific HR investigation, and I am. I'll still do that because we'll run things by each other, and we'll learn from each other and maybe past experiences. But sometimes the department head said, hey, I specifically want you to keep this confidential and to yourself, and that's exactly what I'll do. But it's tough. I mean, like I said, confidentiality is very tough. You don't want to get to a point where people think they're going to lose their job for saying things, if you are investigating or interviewing them. But at the same time, you want that investigation, what's the right word I'm looking for here, not to be compromised. You want it to be a valid investigation that, nobody, I guess, on the outside has really messed with. And so if you want to get the right information or the correct information from people, I think it's important to at least direct them to have some confidentiality there.
One of our listeners asked, is it true that companies can violate their own policies because they are not actual law? I have been told this by an HR director.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's true. Every state, every local, every federal law can be different, and so and every company can have their own. Like, for instance, bullying isn't a protected activity, in federal. So, but our company actually does. We put it in our employee handbook, which is, kind of like the key, handbook for all policies that each employee should know. We have an anti-bullying, and so we take it serious, and so we can discipline and up to terminate, individuals, because we take it so seriously.
I think that does bring up an interesting point, because I've seen that in certain situations where, when you talked about federal laws and state laws and things of that nature, there are certain situations and sort of protections, I guess you can say, that could be state law or a federal law, or maybe even not a state law, that a company will value that state laws or federal laws may not, depending on that. I mean, we could be talking about things. I mean, it could be sexual orientation. It could be other things that may not be protected everywhere.
Right.
How often do you see those two things kind of come up against each other versus company policy versus state or federal policy?
I mean, I haven't had much experience here really in that case, but I do hear cases out there. And if you go, and just to the interwebs and you kind of research the local, and federal and state cases, you'll see that pop up quite a bit. Anywhere from, an individual got terminated because of religious reasons, and they felt they weren't valid. Social media is a big one right now. People are starting, or employees are starting to have a social media policy. Well, you've got to be careful with that, because people have a right, because of their protected and concerted activity, to say certain things about their employer on Facebook and on Twitter, which, an employer would look at and be like, no, that's totally a terminable offense. They did this or that, or said, things about the company. So you see it out there. I just don't have much experience, here with my employer.
Right. Another question we received. So let's say there is bullying and your policy says that you should discipline, but the bullying is done by an upper level manager and nothing is done.
Well, that's a really, really good question, because I think there's also an obligation to HR to ensure things or people are being treated fairly, and policies are out there for a reason, and that's to every level. I mean, a good employer will, from the top down, say these policies apply to everyone, and it doesn't matter if you're the CEO or the COO or the CFO or whatever CO. You are expected to treat everyone exactly the same as we expect as an employer. And so, but I could see that becoming a difficult situation in some companies and some businesses. There's always a boss. Everyone has a boss, right? So I think at that point you really kind of look at the department head of HR and kind of let them direct you and handle that situation and let you know kind of how to handle it.
Great. We talked about, or you mentioned something about timing as far as reporting things, the employee reporting things, but My question has to do with how important is the timing when it comes to completing a workplace investigation?
It's critical. It's critical because the information is fresh, and so you want to make sure you start that investigation if need be as soon as possible. And it's just people tend to forget things as time goes along. The information tends to change as time goes along. And so I think that's why timing is so critical. Also, probably the most important thing is if there's a behavior that needs to be stopped, you want to make sure that's stopped as soon as possible, and it's not ongoing. And so I think, for those reasons, timing's important.
And I think we tapped into this, but I did get another question regarding state regulation, and she asked, is an investigation different if it relates to reporting of state regulation or law?
It can be. It can be. I mean, you can work with your state. We're in Kansas, and I actually work with Kansas quite a bit, when it comes to state laws. And I'll usually, just to get clarification or, make sure I understand the policy correctly. It's always good as an HR professional to make sure you have your contacts in state, and federal and local places. And it's just good to build relationships that way. And that way you can shoot them an email and say, hey, can you clarify? We've got a situation possibly going on. Can you clarify? Is this something we should be taking action on? So yeah, definitely.
Great.
So earlier we sort of went over the steps to an investigation. Does that vary company to company? And, what should the first step be if your company policies are different, to the people that are listening, if they want to initiate an investigation as an employee?
It could. Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could change. But I think in a broad general sense, it's probably going to remain pretty similar. Come up with a strategy. And you're talking about the kind of protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Okay. So yeah, I think it's going to basically, stay the same. You've got to seek to understand. You've got to get the information, collect the data, come to a conclusion, take action, follow up. I think those things are kind of a general sense of what you're going to see in investigations from company to company, but it definitely could.
Is there a difference in questioning procedures for the complaining employee and the accused employee?
Is that what we're calling them, complaining employees?
Plaintiff, right? In the court, the plaintiff and defendant.
Accuser, accusee.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, I think there is. It's really important when you do these investigations that you do, and this is why they're objective, not subjective. You're not putting your personal feelings or opinions and things that may make you angry or make you, feel a certain way. But you start these investigations and these questions not from an emotional standpoint. You don't want to make someone feel guilty from the onset when you're just trying to seek to understand what happened, right? People will shut down. You're not going to get the information that you need. And it's just not, the right way to do things. But, you want to make sure that the accuser is they will be heard. Their, complaints, whether valid or not valid, that they're important to you and that you will look into them, right? And so whether there's something there or even if it's your opinion, well, let me give you an example. Once in a while we have individuals that complain maybe about their supervisor or the work that their manager is making them do, and we come to the conclusion, well, that's not harassment as you've claimed. That's them managing you. They are actually managing you, and that's so. I think it's important that they know, hey, we'll look into it. We'll seek out to find this information, and we'll let you know what we find. As far as the accused employee, that's important not to make them be guilty before they you find any information out that they're guilty. And so the question. The questioning to the accused employee oftentimes is asking them if they know why we would be talking to them. Is there any reason that we would be doing an interview with them? Do they have anything they want to share with us before you even, kind of let them know what this investigation's about. And that's important, I think, because you'll get way more information than you bargained for sometimes, but they'll know that maybe something had been told to them or to us that may not be, what they intended or wanted to do. So,
sort of hinging off of that question, are there protections to consider for the accuser, the person that comes in and accuses another? What are those protections, if there are any?
Retaliation's the big one. There's protection. Companies have a policy that's no retaliation, non-retaliation, and it's basically stating that if an employee, makes a claim or an accusation and comes to HR, that they cannot be retaliated against, and retaliated in a way that they can't lose their job because they made that claim or accusation, whether it be true or untrue. They can't be demoted. Their pay can't change because of it. They can't be treated, unjustly because of that. And so I think that's the main protection. And that's important in these HR interviews. Every single time you interview someone, you want to make sure that you have a disclaimer statement talking about we do have a non-retaliation. And and it goes both ways. You want to mention it to them so they know they're protected. And you also want to mention that, if there's another individual that makes a claim against them, that they can't retaliate against that individual. So.
Awesome. So I have a few more questions here from our listeners. So the first one I have is, if an employer has an ethics line, and I'm assuming that's a line that they can call, like kind of a whistleblower line they can call for reporting, will HR still handle the investigation just as if there was direct reporting to HR?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's probably a compliance department or HR, but yeah, it definitely could. We've got a a hotline here like that, and it depends on what situation it's in. If it deals with students, then maybe it'll go over to compliance. They'll take a look at it. But if it has to do with specific employees, it goes to us. If it has to do with students and employees, then maybe we'll kind of work together on that. So it really kind of depends on it. But I think an ethics line it's a pretty nice tool for employers to have too.
Cool. So Lynn asks, so if someone is found guilty at the conclusion of an investigation and termination is the only option, are they given an opportunity to leave on their own accord, or are they just dismissed?
That really depends on the situation and what the company's policies are. If the behavior, if there's an act of what I call commission, they purposely did something to hurt someone else, then oftentimes they'll be taken out of the situation immediately, even maybe before the investigation is concluded. If someone is claiming, let's say, for example, sexual harassment, and sits right next to the accuser, it might be, and I know I say, hey, not guilty until proven guilty, but in a situation like that, even worse, what if something worse happened in the next week or so when you were doing the investigation? So sometimes it might be good to, say, hey, we're going to give you some paid time off over the next 2 or 3 days while we investigate the situation. Just take them out of the situation so nothing else is going to happen during that time, and then we'll bring you back and talk to you about the conclusion of it. But otherwise, yeah, it depends on the situation and the infraction and the behavior, whether you let them leave on their own accord. I will tell you, most times than not, as soon as it's concluded, you bring the individual in and they're dismissed immediately.
And this one kind of piggybacks off the previous topic we were talking about as far as protection of retaliation. What happens if there is a situation where retaliation has taken place?
Well, then that's its own investigation. That's another investigation itself. Boom, there you go. There's an
Investigation of the investigation.
Of the investigation of the investigation, because that's taken very seriously. That can be a terminable offense. And so, you want to ensure if there's a claim on retaliation that all of a sudden you start the investigation on that, and you come up with a strategy and you start interviewing and finding that information out.
How long do workplace investigations typically take?
Oh gosh, it could be anywhere from a day to a month, and that's I think a really good question, because people expect an answer right away, right? If there's an accuser that comes in and says, hey, this individual's mistreated me or he's bullying me or whatnot, they want you to have that investigation done as soon as possible. So number one, it's not going on again, and number two, so it can be concluded that it was true and they can go on with their lives. But sometimes it takes time. Sometimes I remember an investigation we had that was a pretty serious investigation. Unfortunately, it was over a holiday season, and half the people we needed to talk to were out of the office, and so it lasted a lot longer than we wanted it to. And so, and sometimes you keep finding other people you need to talk to. And so 1 or 2 people turn into 20 people. And so it's going to take a lot longer than it would have initially when you thought, hey, here's our strategy. So it varies.
How are workplace investigations typically closed?
Well, you find your conclusions, and you write a final report about your conclusion and your findings, and then with the final report you follow up with all the individuals needed, and it's really the follow-up that kind of concludes the entire investigation. But you hold on to that information, you document that information, you hold on to that, because in the future you could need that information. But I'd say follow-up is probably how you close it.
Awesome. Well, we've gotten a lot of great information on this topic today. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Is there any additional information that you'd like to share with our listeners with regard to this topic? Or, I know a lot of our students are, either studying HR, considering HR, and this is a big element of that. Any final bits of wisdom or advice you'd like to share?
Well, one thing I've learned is just take your time. Don't rush things when it comes to an investigation. Really sit back, get all the information you need, think about your strategy. Don't rush things. Even if you feel personally that maybe it's not a situation that's a serious one, or this person's complained 4 or 5 times and already, and so it's just who that person is. Try to keep that emotion out of it and take it seriously, because the time that you don't take it seriously and you rush it is going to be a time an attorney says, well, thanks for doing that, because that helps me have a case against you as an employer. So lawyers love employees who don't take their time with these investigations and rushes them. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is just take it seriously. It's important no matter what, and take it slow.
Cool. We have time for one more question, or maybe a couple more questions here. From our listeners who wants to know how unions play a role in these situations.
Well, companies, and I'll just let you know, we don't have union here, and so I haven't been experienced in that as maybe some of my peers have before. But unions, I do know if there's a union involved, then oftentimes they will have their own investigation going on. They may have some representatives, and you'll collaborate with them as well, and they'll be involved in the whole investigation process at times as well. So
I had another question that's not necessarily, it's sort of investigation related, but so a lot of times I feel like people are stepping on toes if they go directly to HR versus the chain of command. And I just was wondering what's your take on that, or any reassurance for employees that are having a problem?
Well, my take on that is the people that think you're stepping on toes better not be HR, because HR wants you to be open to come to them. Now, we may say, hey, does your supervisor know? Have you spoken to your department head? In some situations, and we'll say, well, let's, make sure that you communicate that to them, or let's get them involved before we move forward. But, the people that think that you're stepping on toes, I think they should probably have a conversation, or I would have a conversation with them as HR to say, hey, that we've got an open door policy, and in no way, shape, or form should people feel uncomfortable or feel bad for coming in speaking to HR, because quite frankly, it could be about you, and they can't come to you. So I think it happens, but I think it's important that you build an environment where people feel comfortable.
That was a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. One more question here from our listeners. Lynn wants to know, for someone who would be considering HR as a profession, what would you say is the most gratifying aspect of being an HR manager?
Gosh, that's a really good question. There's so much. I mean, listen, people view, some people, I can't say everybody, sorry, view, an HR department to be scary, because they bring down the bad news, and they terminate people, they discipline people. They're the principal's office. I don't view it that way. I really don't view it that way. I have an opportunity to offer people jobs and find new candidates and see people have pay raises and great performance reviews and teach them and train them and lead them. And I see a lot of the good. The good way outweighs the bad in HR, and that's what's gratifying to me. And one of the other things, selfishly, is for my own reasons. In HR, you are almost like the lifeline of the school, or I'm sorry, not the school, but the company. A lot of departments just work within their department. HR is every department. It's every aspect, because it's every employee in that that company. And that's gratifying because you really feel relevant. You're making a difference in other people's lives in the company.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions from our moderators? Awesome. Well, again, Brandon, thank you so much. This was awesome information.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. We have a lot of good interaction for this session. So that's awesome. Great questions asked today. Definitely want to let anyone know, if you do have any other questions regarding this topic or anything else career related, if you do have questions for those of you who are seeking potential careers in HR or in any specific profession that we can assist you with, definitely feel free to reach out to the Career Services Department. Our information is listed here. For those listening on your phones or other devices, I'll let you know our number direct. It's 800-955-2527, extension 173, or you can email us directly at careerservices@grantham.edu. And we also invite you to take part in our Career Launch program. For those of you who are looking to transition, the Career Launch is a great comprehensive and interactive program that's going to give you the tools that you need to secure those positions that you're seeking, everything from effective resume writing, interview skills, networking, branding yourself, salary negotiation, the list goes on, and we invite you to take part in that, and it is free of charge to all Grantham students and alumni, so we look forward to hearing from you. But again, thank you for joining us, and on behalf of Career Services and Human Resources here at Grantham University, we hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.